And my colleague Natasha Israni joins us from Queens, from outside that club. Natasha, what is the latest that you can tell us, especially with the ISIS angle being probed now?
Yes, well, the Islamic State or ISIS angle is being probed by the FBI and other authorities here, including Homeland Security. But interestingly, about 24 hours ago, they believed that the attacker, the suspect here, the former military veteran, had probably had help from 3 other individuals. And there was a lot of reports on IEDs, which were found in the French Quarter area of New Orleans where the attack took place. And these were then were safely diffused. But now the FBI has come out just a few minutes earlier saying that they believe that the suspect might have acted alone, describing him as a lone wolf. That is what they are saying right now, because earlier they were looking not only at other suspects, but were also looking at possible links with the Vegas attack. Now, the links with the Vegas attacks have also not been finalized. It's just something that authorities are looking into. The parallels between the Vegas attack, in which a Cybertruck exploded outside a Trump hotel, and this attack in New Orleans, in which about 14 people were killed and dozens were injured, was that they took place hours between each other, 3:15 in the morning in New Orleans and 7:15 in Vegas. And also the rented vehicles in both the cases were from the budget app Turo. So that was a link that authorities were investigating. They continue to do that. But the new development now is from the FBI that they believe that this former military veteran might have acted alone.
Right. Natasha, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, this year hasn't really started well for him. This is a big challenge for Donald Trump as he takes over from Biden. What lies in store for him particularly?
Well, President-elect Trump came out on social media yesterday. First, he started off his post by, again, revving up anger and frustration, as well as despair that some people do feel in this country regarding immigrants. And he was stoking that once again. That's something that he did in the run-up to his election. But he was trying to say that the attacker was probably an immigrant, and that turned out to be false because the attacker is U.S.-born. He was born in a place about a few hours in Texas, from Houston, is a U.S. citizen and not an immigrant. But that is straight out of Donald Trump's playbook. He really stokes up fears around that. And I think the public hopes that there'll be less of that, because when he is sworn in on January 20th as the next president of the United States, they're hoping for a more unified time. A lot of people after the elections were very relieved that there was no violence post-elections, because there had been a lot of concern about that, given the insurrection that took place also a few years ago, the last time Donald Trump was defeated and Biden came into power. So yes, it is unfortunate that the first day of the new year starts on this note. But at the moment, the connections for the Las Vegas attack with terrorism are not being confirmed. But the first one, which is New Orleans, is being seen as a terrorist attack. Now, again, going back to the Islamic State angle, while the attacker and suspect was inspired by the Islamic State, it's not clear whether the Islamic State actually supported him, whether in arms or whether in the actual planning. So still a lot of loose threads, which the Trump administration will be taking on in a few days.
All right, Natasha Israni, thank you very much for getting us all the latest and putting everything in perspective for our viewers. In fact, this entire incident, it has sparked widespread condemnation, and it also raises a lot of questions, especially with respect to the security of the United States. In fact, I'm currently joined by Glenn Carl, a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats. This also includes terrorism. He's also an author and a columnist. I also have with me Jake Novak, a political analyst there. Gentlemen, welcome to NDTV. My first question to you, Mr. Carl, specifically with respect to terrorism and national security there. How will the Trump administration respond to such incidents now?
Well, I think we've heard how it will, but let me preface that answer by framing the way one really must approach a terrorist issue, or frankly, any issue, is first you have to understand the problem before you can march off and try and solve it. And President-elect Trump's statement, one that initially thought it was an immigrant, and he blamed immigrants for higher levels of crime, and then would turn reflexively to the group ISIS, is all wrong and misleading. The phenomenon of Islamic terrorism on the whole, the trend has been very clear for 25 years, that it's shifting from attacks organized and guided by specific groups and individuals to what you referred to correctly as the intelligence community calls lone wolves or inspired jihadists, individuals who, for whatever series of reasons, and we can go through that, identify with the grievances and messages of Islamic extremism, radical Islam, jihadism, and so on, and then strike out as they imagine themselves idealists by killing people. That's not a problem solved by going and attacking a specific group. Important as it is to just destroy coherent terrorist organizations such as ISIS. The statement about immigrants is frankly either ignorant or willfully malicious, because it really has nothing to do with the phenomena we're dealing with, which almost certainly appears from all the data we've received, and we don't know the answers yet, but it all appears to be very much in line with the pattern of Islamic terrorism of the past couple of decades, progressively moving to acts by individuals, which is exponentially harder for intelligence services and law enforcement agencies to track and to stop than coherent groups.
Absolutely. Mr. Novak, you know, Donald Trump, he comes across as someone who has a very no-holds-barred approach, especially to issues like these. What measures do you think will be taken in order to prevent similar attacks in the future, and especially under Mr. Donald Trump's presidency?
Well, the first thing that will happen is that we'll see a focus on the real problem. Under the Obama and now the Biden administration, we've had a law enforcement establishment in this country that has cared more about woke ideology, DEI policies, spying on Christians and Catholics who pray in the Latin Mass, and all this other stuff, which may be a threat in a very infinitesimal way, but is not our major threat. The whole world, not just the United States, is under the massive, massive threat of Islamist terror. It doesn't matter what MO they take on, whether it's soft targets like this, whether it's radicalizing lone wolves, or whether it's a larger militia type situation in the Middle East. It doesn't matter. This is the main concern. And this administration, this Biden administration, has barely even talked about it, has focused on other policies. And even if most of the money is still being focused on real threats, the messaging from a president, the messaging from an attorney general or a head of the FBI is also very important. And if you know you're in the FBI or the DOJ or any of the other security services, and you know that you're not going to get promoted if you weed out cells like this, that really the focus is on something else politically, you're not going to do it. So I think on day one, Donald Trump gets into office, it will be clear that the number one priority is facing the number one threat, not some imagined stuff, but the number one threat, which is Islamist terror. It has not gone away in the United States. And just because it's changed its MO a little bit, and now it's focusing more on recruitment and ISIS coming through the southern border. And this guy wasn't an ISIS fighter coming through the southern border. Yes, he was an American-born citizen. But we've known since a few years ago that ISIS fighters are coming from the southern border. And whether that had anything to do with this attack or not, we don't know yet, and certainly no one should have commented on it. But still, that's a priority, and I think that will be clear when he takes office.
All right. Mr. Karl, you know, we have seen how unstable the situation is in the Middle East at the moment. When you look at Syria, especially after Assad's removal, will ISIS be bolstered, is the question. And is this something that the U.S. will be monitoring?
Well, the answer to the last part of your question is a very simple yes. If they aren't monitoring it, they're unconscious. And everyone from the furthest right to the furthest left in the American political spectrum, if he is sane, will be looking very closely at Syria in light of the instability, hopeful instability at the moment, but instability is potentially very, very dangerous. And ISIS exists, and there are uncontrolled territories in what we call Syria, which is a massive ungoverned competing factions at present. So certainly we'll look at that. Will the risk go up? Well, I think the risk has gone up because instability is harder to control and predict. May things get better? There is now actually a possibility that Syria will improve from every perspective, and we're talking about the security one from an international angle. That is possible, but we don't know the answer to that at present because we haven't seen the government, quote, government, the new people in power, really seat their power in any stable way yet. We don't know what Turkey will do. We don't know how the Kurds will react to what Turkey will do. We don't know about Russia's continuing presence there and what they'll do, or Israel, or it's more than vestigial, the Iranian influence, which has been greatly weakened. There are so many variables that are in play that absolutely the authorities will be looking at all of those issues, and in particular, in the context of our discussion, ISIS and Islamic extremism there, very important. And that's why America has had soldiers there to try to, frankly, kill and disrupt radical Islamists.
Right. Mr. Jake Novak, speaking a little bit about domestic terrorism in the United States, how can the U.S. balance the need to prevent domestic terrorism with the need to protect civil liberties and prevent racial and religious profiling? Because that is also a very, very important part of it.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to make it clear. We need clear leadership. So one of the things that you're talking, that's a very important balancing act. And I think that we need a president, and we need more politicians and more people in the media, frankly, to make a couple of things clear to the American people. Islamist terrorism is a huge threat, and saying that is not Islamophobic. People don't need to be afraid of saying that anymore. It's the same thing with crime in America. The number one victims of crime in America are our racial minorities. A black person in America is 11 to 12 times more likely to be the victim of a crime. What kind of maniac cares more about who gets arrested for the crime when they actually commit it than the actual victims of the crime? I think it takes a maniac to be more worried about that than worried about protecting our victims. So that's the first thing. People need to be able to say there's nothing wrong with focusing on the major threats in this country. We're not talking about profiling here. When there's evidence of someone posting online and saying, I'm going to kill you, it's not racist to go investigate them, period. That's not and it's also not a breaking of the First Amendment rights. You have free speech, but you can't specifically threaten to attack people with those free speech rights. Then you lose those rights. So I think first and foremost, that has to be made clear. But second of all, we need to understand something else, which is that, yes, things in Syria are important. All these political issues are important, but let's not get off track here. The violence is not a means to an end. The violence is the end. That is what is attracting these people, the commission of violence. They may say that they've been a victim of something. They may say they want to try to change something politically. But honestly, we're not going to defeat these people until we realize the actual act of violence, the blowing up of a truck, the ramming of people with the truck. That's the goal. That's the end goal. It's not, I hope this changes the way people vote, or I hope this changes the way things go on Syria. That's not the point. And we need to be more smart. We need to be smarter about who these attackers are and what their real motives are.
All right, Jake Novak and Mr. Karl, thank you very much for your valuable inputs and fascinating conversation there.